Hi everyone, my name is Abhinaba and I'm the co-host of the Acceptance of Life podcast, the podcast for spiritual growth in the 21st century. Our podcast is basically an ongoing series of conversations between me and my spiritual friend and brother, Vajin Armstrong from New Zealand. Vajin and me have known each other for 20 plus years and also have walked the spiritual path for that long. We both follow the teachings of Sri Chinmoy, a fully realized spiritual master who has attained to the highest states of spiritual consciousness. And I've known Vajin since we both took the first steps on our path. I just love, and I'm sure that you will too, his amazingly profound grasp of spiritual topics and spirituality in general. I personally don't know anyone who's able to verbalize and explain these ancient spiritual truths with such clarity and depth of understanding, and also manages to reveal their use and their practical application in our modern 21st century lives. Now, in this episode, we're going to explore three fundamental questions about ourselves and the place we occupy in the universe. Who am I? Where am I? And what am I? We will explore the theory of the mechanical universe, the natural universe, and also the universe as a cosmic play or divine drama. And they all have tremendous implications of how we conduct ourselves in the world and how we derive meaning from our life. We also talk about the inner voice and the voice of the soul and how we can listen to and respond to these subtle whispers without getting caught up in the reasoning mind. It's also somewhat of a personal episode, as both Vajin and myself tell the stories of how we ended up where we are in our work situations, and both of us feel that we are guided there by our souls. This episode is jam-packed with some great takeaways for your own spiritual journey. And if you feel you need some guidance on your spiritual path, then this may just be the podcast for you. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this episode.
If you purely believed it was just simply a mechanical universe, you would act in a way that would accrue yourself the most benefits and the most resources. So you would be willing to lie, cheat, steal, do whatever you could to advance yourself, because there's no overriding good to aim toward. The mind is a wonderful servant, but a very poor master.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, most of us use our mind as the master, and the heart, or the deeper part of our being that we should be listening to, becomes the servant.
Yeah.
And so we have everything the wrong way, the relationship the wrong way around. And so when you start to change that, and you start to, instead of following your mind and listening always to your mind, you start following your heart, you actually see your life becomes radically more interesting.
And chaos is also associated with creativity. So people who are innovative, they need this bit of chaos, this unknown thing.
Yeah.
They explore, they venture out into the unknown, the chaotic world, and there they see new structures and new possibilities.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it's for the people with order later to kind of build new structures from those discoveries, right?
Yeah, you are not some small finite being. You are actually the ripple of energy of the Big Bang, manifesting itself in every single moment as we move forward.
Because you are the Big Bang.
You are the Big Bang.
Oh, man.
One topic I wanted to touch on a little bit today was the topic of who am I?
Who am I?
Who am I?
Okay.
And who am I is one of the immortal and eternal questions. I think as soon as humans develop the ability to think in the way that we can in these days, in a self-aware fashion, that was really one of the first and most important questions we started grappling with.
Yes, absolutely.
And so many spiritual masters have talked about this concept as well. And one of the great spiritual masters from southern India, Sri Ramana Maharshi, he said that if you could really understand or truly understand the answer to this question, you would understand the entire universe.
Yeah, that was basically his spiritual practice, was to keep asking yourself the question, who am I?
Yeah.
And eventually the answer would reveal itself.
You would crack something. You would break on through.
It's almost like a Zen koan.
Yeah. So, and this question actually has tremendous power, and I have a little story about that.
Okay.
So, in my store in Christchurch, in my music store, Gandava Loka, I am lucky enough to still have a landline telephone. And one of the great blessings of having a landline in this day and age is the ability to receive scam calls.
Wonderful.
And so our dear brothers in India have a very lucrative business, I think, in this way.
Yeah.
And so every now and then, every few months, perhaps I'll get a scam call from India. And one of my dreams was always to get the scammer to admit that he was doing a scam call during the call.
Wow.
And if you've ever had one of these calls, they're very good. They don't break character. That's
right.
That's one of their things. And so
I've never had one from India. I mean, they don't reach our neck of the woods?
No, so
Europe?
in New Zealand, all of the scam calls come out of India.
Okay.
And so whenever the call comes through, I can immediately tell it's a scam call because, first of all, the sound quality is very bad.
Uh-huh.
It almost sounds like they're talking out on the streets. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of general noise on the line.
Right.
And so this was several years ago. So I got this call, and there was a little bit of a delay in the connection. And so I said hello, and the gentleman on the other end, there was a little bit of a pause, and he said, "Who is this?" And I said, yes, the immortal question. As Ramana Maharshi said, if you can understand the answer to this question, you will understand the entire universe.
So you actually told him this right off the bat?
Right off the bat, and
Oh
it was completely spontaneous.
Yeah.
I did not plan this at all, and it was just one of those.
But of course, you immediately knew it was a scam call. Like the moment you heard the delay.
Yeah, as soon as I heard the delay, and he started by saying, "Who is this?"
Oh yeah.
And so I started with that comment, and immediately that threw him off. It really put him on the back foot. Yeah. And so we started the conversation, and he started to try and get into his.
What was his response when you said that?
He was slightly puzzled and bamboozled, and he tried to get back in character and start going through his script of what he was wanting to convince me of.
Yeah.
And I was playing along very nicely at this point, and oh yes, and at some point he just stopped and said, "Excuse me, sir, please, I have to let you know. This is actually a scam call, and I do not want to do this to you." And I said, "Oh, my friend," I said, "I understand. We all need to make a living in this world. And you are doing that in this way at this time, but maybe you will find something else in the future."
Wow.
And so I was really amazed that this question alone, who am I, had the power to transform the nature of the Indian scammer from a rogue to a saint.
So while he was doing his spiel, while I was explaining, all of a sudden it kind of hit him, and he stopped himself.
He did
mid-sentence. He said, "I'm sorry, sir." So it's almost like this question had some time to kind of boil itself down.
Yeah, it permeated somewhere into him, and so that really convinced me of the power of this idea that if you can really understand who am I, you can really understand something very powerful. And
so, how did you part ways?
So I thanked him for his time, and I wished him well for his life and his journey, and we parted ways.
Okay.
So it was a very amicable end to the call, and that's not often.
And he's now in an ashram somewhere in South India.
I think
studying Ramana Maharshi.
He's radically transformed his nature. But why I wanted to start with that question is, I think that question is fundamental to reality. But there's also some other questions that I think that are perhaps even more fundamental.
But about this question, though, who am I? When I just ask myself this, there's a ton of different answers you could give.
There are.
I'm a human being.
Yes.
I am Abhinava.
Yes.
I am Dutch.
Yes.
But are these all correct answers, or are these incomplete answers?
Yeah, well, I think this question goes all the way down and all the way up. So you can start at the basic physical level. So you can say, I am this body.
I'm a human being.
I am some sort of matter, which is coalesced together to create this form that I'm existing in. And then above that, so that's like the purely mechanical level. You're a bunch of molecules that have clumped together.
Physical matter.
Exactly. And then from there, you're going up to the type of creature that we call you. We call you a Homo sapien. So the type of species and the type of animal or creature that you are here. And then on top of that, human beings are very unique in our ability to name things. And some say that is the role of human beings in the universe. We are the beings that name things.
That name things.
We give names to things.
That's all we do.
We go around. I mean, what have we not given a name to?
True.
We have given names to everything.
Yeah, this podcast even has a name.
Exactly. And we don't see other beings or creatures that we know of at this time going around naming things. So that's one of our unique...
Maybe, though, the mountain goats have a name, but just pronounce it differently.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of possibilities there, but we do certainly know that human beings have a great love of naming things.
So that comes after the molecular phase?
The molecular, and then
the
I would
species.
say the species, and then I would say then you have the naming game. So you're a Dutchman, you have a name,
this.
You have a family, you have a story, you have a lineage.
I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a son, I'm an uncle.
Yeah, and so that goes really far.
Well, what about the whole thought world? Famously René Descartes, was he French? I think he was French,
yes,
a philosopher from the 17th century or 18th.
Yes.
Famously said, "I think, therefore I am."
Mm. So that is one of the reasons I think that human beings are such an untold marvel, is because we know in the rest of the universe that there's complex structures and there's complex forms the universe is taking. So we can see stars and we can see nebulas and we can see black holes and we can see other planets. So we can see all these things. And then if we look around on Earth, we can see all of these other life forms. And so there's a certain level of complexity that we can see in all of those things. But human beings have this wonderfully untold level of complexity that exists in our own imagination. So in our world of thinking and imagining, it is almost limitless or boundless space for imagination. So if you think some of the great inventors, someone like Nikola Tesla, the world of imagination that he was connected to and the types of ideas that he had was so out there and so far beyond what many of us will experience in our own thought life that it doesn't seem like there's any limit to what we can imagine and think of.
So in your reasoning, I think, therefore I am, is more like I imagine, or I can imagine, therefore I am. I can imagine worlds, I can imagine storylines, I can imagine scenarios.
Yes, exactly. And so I think that's a really fundamentally important part of who we are, is our ability to imagine, because that's really when we went beyond the animal kingdom and we started to step into the truly human realm, is when we started to imagine. So it was thought that maybe 70,000 years ago we had this experience, which they talk about as the cognitive revolution, where we suddenly started to be able to think and imagine in a way that was previously impossible for us. And so for me, that's one of the great mysteries of life. It's like the beginning of life itself, or the starting of point of the universe. It's like these moments in time where the universe is changed fundamentally in some way. So either bringing into being, or life beginning as we know it. Or for us, this was like a pivotal moment for our journey as human beings, when we suddenly started to be able to imagine. And you look at life from 70,000 years ago to today, how radically different it is now because of that ability to imagine, to tell stories, to come together as groups.
To work, we can collaborate on a much larger scale than any of the other animals, right? We can collaborate with thousands of people. We can build cities, we can build countries.
And so this actually ties into something that I did want to touch on. So we've got the question of who am I?
Just before you go there, I just wanted to touch on the spiritual aspect, because who we are, I think if we go back to Ramana Maharshi's questioning, eventually you'll end up perhaps saying, I am the soul, I am the divine spark, right? There is something beyond all the physical things and even the naming things. It is an unseen reality, but not it's untangible in the physical sense, but it can be experienced and felt.
It's not unknowable.
Exactly. It is unknowable, maybe it's unknown.
And it's unknown, but
then it can become known.
Exactly.
So
So I think that's a really interesting journey to go on, because as you go through this process of maturation as a human being, as a child, you don't have a very strong sense of self, and so as we grow and develop, we start taking on more and more fixed characteristics, or we start creating an identity and a personality for ourselves.
Roles.
Exactly. We start taking on the roles that the world is giving to us. But I think if you keep following that journey of who am I, am I really, the fact that I'm Dutch? Is it really that the fact that, I'm a man, or that I'm this tall? Any of these things truly fundamentally who you are?
Well, they're definitely not eternal. They're definitely very temporary. They're very location bound.
And that's always interesting to think about. If you have a set of ideas or beliefs about yourself, if you imagined yourself being born in a different time, in a different place, would you still have those beliefs? So if you were born 400 years ago in China, or if you were born 1,000 years ago in Africa, would you still have the same ideas and beliefs? And any of the ideas and beliefs that you have about the world that would not still be true at a different time in a different place.
So I would say that most of the ideas about the world and most ephemeral ideas would be radically different.
Yes.
But I think there's some ideas that may have been the same. So if it's about the spiritual nature, about things that are eternal, those ideas don't change.
Exactly. And so I think that's what we're looking for. We're looking for some transcendent ideas that are true now, that will be true in 1,000 years, and were true 1,000 years ago.
And then you touch more on the point of who you really are.
Yeah, and we've seen human beings for thousands of years have been grappling with these questions. So if we go back to Aristotle wrote a great work called Virtues and Vices. And he was looking at what are the qualities or the ways of being that will aid in human flourishing and the ones that will diminish human flourishing. So we've been playing around with these ideas, trying to see what is the right way to live in this world. And so this is where we have to go.
What was his conclusion?
Well, this is where we need to now dive into the next level down. So we've talked about who am I?
Yes.
But there's a couple of other fundamental questions, and that is where am I, and what am I? And so I think, like, if you've got the question of who am I here, like when you're really delving into it in this deepest level, perhaps you do touch all of these other questions.
Okay.
But I like to separate these out, because I think there's some really great insights that you can have about reality from thinking about those. So if we start thinking about where am I, and I don't mean like a geographical location of space. It's not like, okay, we're on the third planet from this particular sun in this particular solar system. That's not what I mean. But it's, what is your picture of the type of universe you're living in?
Okay.
And so the most basic level that we were talking about we would say is what some people like to describe as the billiard ball universe. So a purely mechanical, physical universe.
The Newtonian universe.
Yeah, and so some people would argue that that's what they believe in, that we're just purely living in a physical universe, and everything is just the interaction of different molecules interacting with other molecules. We're just a bunch of molecules that have clumped together into this particular
Very
form.
1890s way of thinking, right? And it's like the end of the 19th century.
It's a wonderful thing, because it really ties into that time and that place where. And it was also taking the idea of God as being the creator, but it was God as a great craftsman.
The clockmaker.
It was like, yes, God with this wonderful, elaborate workshop, and he's got all these pulleys, and he's got all of these cogs and levers.
I think that's the era of steampunk.
Exactly. Yeah. And so this still, though, many people, and I think today, would claim that that's what they believe, that they believe that we live in some sort of purely mechanical universe.
And maybe it's only an unconscious belief.
Exactly.
Held by the culture, which they brought up in.
I like to call them unexamined beliefs. So it's something that you've just sort of taken on board, and you've sort of parked it somewhere, filed it away, and have never looked at it again.
Right.
And you've never questioned about, like, is that really what I believe about the universe? Because that idea of a purely mechanical universe, because you want to think, okay, if that's what I believe about the universe, then how would I act in that universe? And if you purely believed it was just simply a mechanical universe, you would act in a way that would accrue yourself the most benefits and the most resources. So you would be willing to lie, cheat, steal, do whatever you could to advance yourself, because there's no overriding good to aim towards.
What about morality? Does that exist in this world?
Well, that's the thing. Like, where does that exist in a mechanical universe? Like, if you truly believe just simply in a dumb mechanical universe with no intelligence in it at all, like, there is no reason for you to act in a moral way unless it helps you move forward, advance.
Which is the reasoning of the psychopaths, right? I mean, if you really break it down, they only act morally if it can advance their own position.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing about this position is, even if you feel as though you're the most scientifically minded, most mechanical person in the world, it doesn't seem to line up with how you act in the world. It doesn't seem to be the way you interact with day-to-day activities.
Like with your family, for instance.
Yeah, like your family, you don't come into your family. When you're driving your car and someone cuts you off, you don't think to yourself, okay, well, they're just, a collection of molecules that are operating, and his brain, there's a brain in there, and it's creating certain, firing certain neural pathways, and that caused him to change the lane in front of me. Yeah. You don't interact with other people and other situations in that way. You take it as though it's some sort of personal affront to you, as though you were you had some sort of inherent reality, or you're some sort of character, and you take the other people more as a type of character in the drama, like, that you're acting
antagonists to your story.
Exactly, because you get so emotional. If you were truly believed that it was just purely billiards balls.
But couldn't emotions be a part of this mechanical universe? They're just like chemicals that are created so that we can respect our boundaries and the world functions a bit better.
Yeah, it would like, if you take the example, of someone who was trying to interact with the world in such a way, you shouldn't get negative emotions then from someone criticizing you, because you could say, oh, they're just simply, another
observing something.
Yeah, they've got, their own sense organs, and, they're getting faulty information. And so I shouldn't even worry about what they say. But it's very hard to operate in the world, and when someone criticizes you or attacks you in any way, for you to remain completely nonplussed.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult thing. And I see very few people who've managed to pull that off.
It sounds very stoic.
Yeah. Well, I think it's even more than that. That's when you're really starting to become sort of a stone Buddha, as we might say.
Exactly, which we don't want to become.
No, but so if we look at that would be the most basic sort of universe, I would say, the purely mechanical universe. Then other cultures over the centuries have come up with different models. And one that I really like is the idea of the type of natural universe. And the Taoists in China are a great proponent of this type of universe.
Yeah.
And they would say that, because there's always this great question, because people tend to feel as though they've somehow come into the universe. They've somehow come here to Earth.
Yeah.
But from where? It's like this idea of being like thrown into the universe. But in reality, if we look at the world as some sort of natural system, we haven't come into the universe, we've come out of the universe. We've grown out of the universe. It's like the plant growing out from the soil that it's been planted in. He doesn't think like, oh my God, where did I come from? It's like, oh, of course, I came from this world. I'm part of this world. And
that changes your approach to the world if you have that kind of belief system.
Exactly. I think it really does change your approach to the world. And what it does as well, if you have this type of picture of the world, is you start to think, okay, if I am of this world, and this natural world seems to have certain ways of being that allow the flourishing of life, and then other ways of being, it's like plants. They need the right amount of sunlight. They need the right amount of moisture. They need to be planted at the right time. Like there's all of these ways that you can create an environment that is not conducive for the flourishing of those plants.
Yeah, it's like the natural laws. There's some laws operating.
Exactly.
Which the flower has to, adhere to in order to flourish and blossom.
Yeah, we can't decide, okay, I want to plant this certain type of flower, in the middle of winter, or I want to grow tomatoes at this particular time of year if that's not their season. Yeah. And so as human beings, that's really interesting to start thinking about, like, is there ways of acting in the world which will actually aid in our flourishing, and other ways of action, other courses of action which would actually diminish our flourishing?
So that seems like the birth of morality there.
It does. It seems like there's like, for the Taoists, there was this great idea of trying to act within the flow of nature. And when you are going against the flow and going against your own nature and going against the nature of the universe and the world that you came from, you would cause suffering from yourself.
The Taoists are also the creators of the yin-yang symbol, aren't they?
They are.
So
indeed.
what does that symbolize for them?
So that's a wonderful thing, because everything in Taoism is about opposites. So you cannot have short without having tall, because you only have short because you have tall.
Yeah.
You can't have dark without having light, because you will not understand the difference between the two. So everything is a pair of opposites.
Yes.
And so for them, the yin-yang symbol is this wonderful way of encapsulating those two, the pairings of opposites. So
and it also could mean that the opposite is present in seed form inside the thing itself.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
The dark already carries the seed of light.
Yeah.
As the light could carry a spot of darkness.
Yeah.
And the hot has the seed of cold. The cold has the seed of hot.
Yeah, and for with the yin yang symbol, is one half is the masculine, one half is the feminine. So one half is the light, one half is the darkness. One half is the outgoing, and one is the incoming. And
so why would the feminine be associated with the dark?
And so the idea is, when we talk about the qualities of masculine and feminine, we're not saying male and female. It is different, because these are more an abstract encapsulation of qualities.
Right.
And it's just this certain sort of grouping. So in the traditional way of looking at it, you would say that the masculine is order, and the feminine is chaos. And it's from chaos which creativity comes, which newness comes, new life, new
Not to say
creation.
that one is good, one is bad. That's
exactly.
Very childish way to approach that.
Exactly, like both are
necessary.
Both are completely necessary. And the thing is, if you look at the yin-yang symbol, there's the idea of the yin-yang symbol is that you want to be perfectly balanced between the two halves.
Okay.
So you see a line through the middle. So it's like if you were walking through the world, you want one half in masculine, one half in feminine, one half in chaos, one half in order.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is if you have too much order
Yes.
and not enough chaos, so you have too much structure and not enough creativity and newness,
It's the
your
extreme.
life becomes too dull and rigid and inflexible. Whereas if you have too much creativity and chaos, but not enough structure and order, it's very difficult to do anything.
Yeah, exactly. And chaos is also associated with creativity. So
Yeah.
people who are innovative, they need a bit of this bit of chaos, this unknown thing.
Yeah.
They explore, they venture out into the unknown,
Yeah.
the chaotic world, and there they see new structures and new possibilities.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it's for the people with order later to kind of build new structures from those discoveries, right?
Yeah, and I feel that in my own life. So I live in New Zealand, and like New Zealand, like most of the Western world, is quite an ordered and structured place. And so if I'm always in that environment, I tend to find that at some point I start to feel slightly constricted, and I start to feel like the rigidity of the culture. And you probably feel that in Northern Europe as well. There's quite a strong masculine or mind in the culture.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, when I travel in the East, I feel a lot more of this feminine energy, this creative newness.
Not everything is set in stone. There's much more. Things are flowing a little bit more.
And so I always feel like I need some time in my life in that part of the world. Like India for me is a place that has this wonderful divine feminine quality to it. And that's really interesting as well, because in the Western world, we have this figure of God or the divine as this the heavenly Father, this white man with a beard, and he's all about light and he's all about justice.
Yeah.
And in India, on the other hand, they've got this wonderful pantheon of the divine feminine. They really understand the feminine aspect of the divine in a way that we really don't understand in the Western world. So in India, they've done such an amazing job of separating the Shakti or the divine feminine energy into all of its different manifestations. So from Parvati, the ideal wife and mother, all the way through to Mother Kali, who is seen as the destroyer of ignorance.
Yes.
And so you have all of these different graduations or different qualities embodied by the divine feminine.
Yeah.
And I think that's really lovely to see all of the different ways it's manifest.
And so that changes, of course, the belief system of the population who's brought up in that culture.
Yes.
So they understand that part of life, let's say, much better. They are in a different place, let's say. If you talk about where am I?
Yeah.
If you are brought up in such a culture, you're in a different universe.
Yeah.
You're acting in a different game than the ones who are brought up more in the masculine cultures.
And that takes us to the next layer of where am I. So we've got the mechanical universe.
Yeah.
Then we've got the natural universe.
The Taoists.
And then I would move over to India. And India has this concept of the divine Leela, which means the divine game or the
cosmic
divine
play.
Dance or play.
Yeah.
And so there, for me, as soon as I heard about that, it somehow captured something and triggered something in me that is how I experience the world. I experience the world as though I'm a character in this wonderful cosmic drama, and I'm interacting with these other characters. And what it's like is very much like the human experience. It's like we've been thrown on stage without ever having seen the script. And suddenly we're scrambling to try and figure out who our character is supposed to be and what we're supposed to be doing. And we're trying to, through our interactions with the world, with the stage, and with the other characters on the stage, we're trying to reveal something about ourselves. And we're trying to understand how we should be best operating and playing the character.
So is the goal of this game to find out which character you are and to play it as good as you can?
Yeah, like that to me seems like that to me seems like something that is going to be optimally meaningful over the longest possible period of time.
But then what kind of character could you be? Could you be a villain, for instance?
So, I mean, you have been given a unique set of circumstances. And for me, this is one of the tragedies of this time we're living in, where people are constantly trying to complain about the cards they've been dealt, as we talked about in the previous episode. That
resisting
reality as it is. So you've been put on the stage and you've got a particular costume, a particular outfit you're wearing, and you're in a particular place and time. And there is something for you to learn there. Like, even if you can't see it at this moment, or you don't understand what the lesson is, it seems to me taking that situation, even if you're wrong, even if we're just completely imagining this whole thing, if you simply chose to take that opportunity that you have and to play it the best you can and to try and learn as much as you can from being in that particular situation, that would make your life much more meaningful and much more valuable and much more enjoyable, I think, in the long term, rather than cursing the gods and fate for putting you there.
I always think the best strategy to find out if a scenario works is just to live it through and see what happens, see the result.
Yeah.
So if you're always complaining, see how you feel at the end of a week or a month. You probably won't feel that great. But take this approach that life has meaning and that you are there with a purpose and you're really doing your best to find your purpose and live it. Then see what that brings to you. And I think you'll find that you're much more fulfilled. There's much more happiness, even though life is not going to be easier. Life is always going to be a struggle. Everyone suffers here on earth. And but if we take life as an adventure, I would say, rather than as a some unfortunate happenstance,
an unfortunate series of events.
Exactly. Then you can really accrue meaning from the most unfavorable circumstances. That's also when you visit places like in Asia or in Africa where people don't have a lot of resources, they're not wealthy. But they have very often a wonderful smile and they seem genuinely happy. And it seems to have nothing to do with material circumstances.
No, it really doesn't. And that's very revealing, I think, especially for those of us who have grown up in the Western world where we've lived in a time of great plenitude. It hasn't
plenitude.
Plenitude.
Yes.
It has not fulfilled us and made us happy in the way that we perhaps expected it would.
Exactly.
And that's one of the great tragedies, living in a time where you have so much material comfort, but yet people are really suffering from a lack of meaning and a lack of purpose.
I happen to know somebody who worked for very rich, wealthy families. And he said they were some of the most miserable people he ever met. Like they could have everything, at their fingertips. They had the most expensive cars, the most exclusive vacations, yet they were always miserable and unhappy.
So if we go to that idea of the divine play, how do you think the idea of the soul's mission or the soul's purpose could fit into that?
That's an interesting question. Well, it seems that is the script of the play.
Well,
right?
Very well done, Mr. Dungerman.
I think that's definitely finding out your purpose in life. And that you do have, I believe that wholeheartedly, you do have a role to play here on earth. And it is great. It gives you great joy to find your role, to find your groove.
It does.
And it takes some time. You're not there right away, and you do have to bump your head a few times. You do have to stumble and fall and get up every time.
Your aim is not very good to start with.
Exactly.
You want to go somewhere and achieve something, but you don't quite know what.
Actually, the word sin, which is a word very commonly used in Christianity, which has a lot of negative connotations, but it actually comes from the Greek word hamartia, which means to miss the target, to have faulty aim. So that's all it means. It's like, your aim is not yet perfect. Try again. And aim better.
So that idea of having a soul's purpose or a soul's mission here on earth, that's been talked about by many spiritual masters, but it's really the idea that before we take incarnation here on earth, that we've made some sort of vow or some sort of agreement of what we're going to try and achieve here on earth. And the wonderful thing for me is how that ties into the sense of meaning and purpose here on earth, because the sense of meaning that we feel as human beings can seem very random at times. Because if you and I were both doing the exact same activity, you could possibly feel as though it was the most meaningful, important thing possible to do in that moment. And I could find it so tedious and dull. And it's like, what is it about that situation that can make you feel completely alive and engaged in what you're doing? And I would rather run away and do anything else.
Like working an office job in logistics, for instance.
But it doesn't seem like there's something inherent in the action itself that makes it meaningful. It's something in you that makes that action
something
meaningful.
Resonates in you.
It's like somehow you're aligning yourself with something. This feels like this is something I'm supposed to do. I was
put on earth to move boxes from place to place.
It could be anything. But there is something wonderful, and I would really say that that's something that is so useful to really pay attention to the things that really pull you, that really capture you, that really you get a real just sense of joy, and time speeds up, and you really find yourself in that state of flow and a real complete presence. Because I think that's telling you something about the types of activities you should be spending your time.
So I have a story about that. When I was this is about 15, 16 years ago. I was working at that time in a health food store, And I knew this was not my life's purpose, but it was a good job, and
Yeah.
I had good people around me. But somehow I didn't feel it didn't resonate with me. Like you said, I felt a little bit frustrated, and I wrote an article for a magazine. It was
Yeah.
actually an article about my spiritual teacher, Sri
Mhm.
Chinmoy, about his weightlifting, and
Yeah.
I published it in a weightlifting magazine at
Yeah.
the time. And when it got published, and they even paid me for it,
Yeah.
it gave me so much joy. There was something in my heart was going, yes, I just loved the whole process. I loved
Yeah.
writing it. I loved getting it published. And then I was like, I like this. It gives me so much joy. I decided to try and become a freelance journalist.
Yeah.
A totally different way.
Yeah.
Hadn't studied it. I didn't have any education in
Yeah.
the field, but I felt like this is really what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I just went for it. I studied, the resources I could find online.
Yeah.
And this was about the same time that I saw this documentary, The Secret.
Oh,
This
yes.
famous
Of
documentary,
course.
the law of attraction.
Yes.
And I saw that at just the right time. I just
Yeah.
needed to have that confidence that if you
Yeah.
really want something and you visualize it,
Yeah.
that you can achieve it.
Yeah.
And I started doing that. I started really visualizing myself writing articles and being employed by different magazines.
Yeah.
And I really I made a conscious decision to do that. And I quit my job, and
Yeah.
I started approaching magazines, and I started giving article ideas. And
Yeah.
literally within a month, I had 4 clients. And within
Wow.
4 months, I was published in one of the national newspapers in my country.
That
And
happened.
my career just took off.
Yeah.
And it was really, I felt the time was right.
Yeah.
And this was actually the thing. It gave me so much joy. This is exactly
Yeah.
what you told me. It was in my script, I
Yeah.
felt. And then I was a freelance journalist for 12 years. And,
Yeah.
had a great time of it.
Yeah.
Until something else came along.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful thing, to be open to the other things that come along. Because very often, if we're too rigid with our sense of self and character, we can miss these doors that open in front of us, where there was a whole new potential future for us.
So if we're too much stuck in the rigidity of,
Yes.
of the order world,
Yes.
we
So
need a little bit of chaos.
We always need that little bit of chaos.
Yeah.
And that chaos and creativity, that keeps you on your toes and keeps you paying attention. Because when you go out into the world and you already think you know what's out in the world, you miss nearly everything around you.
Exactly.
Whereas if you take it as though, okay, every day the world is going to be different. If you take your position as, when I leave the door, it will be similar, but it's not the same city as I walked through yesterday. You will notice things in a way that you don't normally notice them.
That seems such a radical idea. Because when we look with our visual senses, the world is the same. It's every day the same. And I think that's the problem, is we are living in our mind. So to the mind, everything is always old.
Yeah.
And that's why I love the teaching of Sri Chinmoy about being in the heart.
Yeah.
Because that's the place where you can actually feel
Yeah.
newness. And you
Yeah.
can feel that things are actually not the same always. There's
Yeah.
always this possibility of discovering new things,
Yeah.
of life being an adventure.
Yeah. And I mean, I make it even a practice that if I leave my town for some time, when I come back, the first thing I try and do is I try and see 10 new things that have changed since I was there last
So
time.
what kind of things are they?
So a new building, or something's changed hands, or they've done something with this park, or whatever it is, but just something has changed.
Yeah.
And that keeps
Even in the physical world.
Yeah, exactly. Even in the physical world, because if I keep that position that things are constantly changing, I'll keep paying attention to the world.
Yeah.
Whereas as soon as I think I know what the world is like, I'll suddenly start missing so many things.
Yes. But I mean, the world being the same, that can occur on many different levels, not just the physical, but also the opportunities that come along. You may think, oh, I'll never get out of this rut. I'm always stuck in this job. I don't like my work.
Yeah.
But even then, there's possibilities, right?
Exactly, and that's the thing. Like, for you, staying open to those possibilities allowed you to take a new path and start a completely different career that you had not even imagined.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be much more fulfilling and much more meaningful for you.
Yeah.
And I had the similar sort of experience. So ending up at the World Music Store was never something I imagined doing.
How did it happen for you?
And so for me, I had just finished my studies, and so I'd studied sports coaching. And so I was always, as I said, from a young age, I'd had a great love of sport. And when I started really meditating seriously, I thought, wouldn't it be nice if I could make my life in some way connected with the sporting realm? And so when I finished my studies in the early 2000s, the problem was it was very difficult to find any paid coaching work as a running coach, because at that point, most coaches were volunteers. in the running world. And so there was no real pathway forwards at that point. So I was looking around, keeping my eyes open, and just this opportunity came up to this idea of having a world music store. And it wasn't even my idea to start with. It was one of my dear spiritual sisters. She was spending some time traveling with Sri Chinmoy, and I think it was actually here in Turkey. And one of our fellow brothers in the community, he had a store, like a Gandavaloka store in Zurich. And so he was telling the story of his store and how Sri Chinmoy, it was his vision to have these stores which sell musical instruments from all over the world. And he was just suggesting that it would be wonderful if we had more of them around the world. So at that point, he had one in Zurich, there was one in Vienna, there was one in, I think the one in Berlin had not quite yet started. So there was only a handful of these stores around the world. And so I thought that sounded, my friend, she thought that I would be perfect to do such a thing. And so she actually rang me up from the Christmas trip in Turkey at that point, and she started telling me all about this this talk that she'd heard about the Gandavaloka stores. And as she was telling me about it, I was thinking to myself, why is she calling me and telling me this? Because I thought I was the least well-equipped person to run a music store, which perhaps I was at that point. But she had a vision.
You were never particularly musical.
No, I'd always had a huge love and a great love of music, but I had never been trained in any musical instruments, and I didn't play anything in particular. And so she suggested that this would be something at the end of the call, that's something that I could be really good at. And I thought to myself, wow, like that is nothing like what I imagined my life to be.
Yeah.
And so instead of immediately closing it down, though, I thought I will meditate on that and I'll see what comes of it. And so I sat down and I meditated on it for a few days to see if I would get a feeling. And at some point, it did intrigue me. There was a sense of the chaos, the unknown there. It was like an adventure because it was going to be stepping into a world that I really knew very little about. And so I actually had the opportunity to send a letter to Sri Chinmoy and ask him if this is something that would be good for me to do. And he meditated on that, and he said yes, that would be something.
Wow!
And so,
and you know, he has the vision. He can kind of see a little bit further.
Yeah, exactly.
Than we can, just with our senses.
Like someone who is playing the game at the level of a great spiritual master, he is operating on all the levels of reality.
He has access to a few other realms.
Exactly. So he sees sometimes your potentiality that you have not started.
You can see your script, so to speak.
In some
your
way.
Soul script.
And so a few months after that, I found myself in Salzburg in Austria. And as soon as I walked into the store there, I fell in love with the place. It was so interesting. Like everything about it was
I've been to that place. It's really small.
Interesting.
It's got like 100,000 instruments.
Yeah, it's just jam-packed from the floor to the ceiling. And my dear brother Ushika, who runs the store there, is a wealth of knowledge and information. And so I spent several months there, and I really fell in love with that whole world there, because what I see it is it's not so much a space just with musical instruments. It's a space full of these portals, because each musical instrument in some way is a key that will help unlock a culture for you. So you may not understand the Native American people at all and have never met them and have never traveled through their lands. But if you pick up and start playing a Native American flute, there's something about the flute and the consciousness that it carries that will start connecting you to their way of seeing the world, their reality, in a way that almost nothing will. So like learning to play the African djembe, or learning to play a Middle Eastern instrument, or learning to play an Asian instrument, they'll start to allow you to connect with that culture through consciousness. It's not that you're explicitly studying and learning about that place, but there's something about the music that the instrument makes.
There's a subtle feeling.
There's a subtle feeling and energy that is embodied in that. And so I found that so interesting, because that was always been one of my great loves is cultures and peoples and their stories from around the world. And so very shortly after that, in 2008, I opened my own store. And then now 17 years later, we're still going. And I realize now it's the exact right thing for me to be doing. But I never would have found it of my own volition. I never would have come up with that idea if that door had not appeared in front of me and I'd been brave enough or willing to look for it and see it and to step through it.
No, it also reminds me of when I started my second career after the freelance journalism, because I now, since almost 5 years, have my own little restaurant.
You're a waffle baron.
I'm a waffle baron in Amsterdam. I'm the waffle emperor. So I do have a little waffle store in Amsterdam, and it's really unlikely coming from journalism to go in there.
I was thinking when you were approaching that idea, I thought, wow, this will be a change, a transformation.
Yeah. Well, but my idea was always in the back of my mind. Like, we do have these restaurants and cafes around the world that kind of connect to our meditation center. So I was in the early 2000s. I worked in a vegetarian restaurant in San Francisco for a year, which was also connected to our meditation center. And so I worked there with students of Sri Chinmoy, and I was very impressed by that whole idea of having a restaurant at the same time being like a very low level entrance to the world of meditation and spirituality through a restaurant.
Yeah.
And so I always had that in the back of my mind that one day I would like to start something like that in my home city.
So the idea with these restaurants is not simply to be selling food.
Exactly. No, it is not simply. It is definitely providing the best possible, culinary experience that you can. But for me, it's also creating an atmosphere, a vibration. I would like to call it, like you talked about. It's an energy, a consciousness, and then when people enter into your space, into your restaurant, they enter into that consciousness, that energy, and it's a very soothing, calming, peaceful energy.
Yeah.
And there's the opportunity to be acquainted with spiritual books. We carry some spiritual books by Sri Chinmoy there, and we have some of his artwork, his music. So you really, it's like you're dipping your toes into the waters of this, this meditation culture.
And how do you go about creating that atmosphere in the space?
That's a good question. So I think it's very much intention. So my intention always is to serve people and to appeal to their higher self.
Yeah.
So when I make a waffle, no matter how mundane that seems, I'm always thinking of the person I'm serving it for has the divine in him or her. So I'm trying to create the food with an idea that I'm serving it to the highest in that person.
Yeah.
And I try to create a nice atmosphere, just also aesthetically. That's aesthetically pleasing, but that's also has, we have plants, we have beautiful artwork, we have, very welcoming atmosphere. And I think definitely the intention of, and the fact that we meditate before we start our work, and we kind of like have this meditative consciousness while we are working.
Yeah.
Some of that enters into the experience for the guests.
So you're really aiming not to be caught up in the stress and the rushing around and shouting and the types of things you see in some kitchens.
Yeah, exactly. That's the goal. And I think that's, on a subtle level, that is definitely an energy that enters into the experience of the guest. So we get a lot of really positive feedback from people who are sensitive to that. And maybe they may not be conscious of the fact that we live that kind of life and we try to create that kind of experience. But something I think rubs off on them. And for me, that's the great magic of having a restaurant, that you can, I'm more than just providing food. I try to create an atmosphere there.
Yeah.
That's really conducive to, to the higher aspects, that touch upon the higher aspects of our life here on Earth. And it can be as simple as a breakfast and lunch place, where you can experience that.
Yeah. And that's one of the most beautiful things, is that it's not what you do. It's how you go about doing it.
100%.
And so there's a great concept in the East called the Do, the D-O, which means the way of things. And so you have Bushido, or you have Taekwondo, and so it's the way of this or the way of that. But it's almost like understanding that almost any activity can be made into a way of transforming your own consciousness and therefore transforming the world.
That's wonderful. It's a beautiful idea. So even if you are, let's say, a garbage collector or, a street cleaner, you can do that with the best possible intention and serving the divine, serving the highest in yourself, and make progress that way.
So you could be practicing waffle dough.
I make a lot of waffle dough.
The way of the waffle.
The way of the waffle.
The sacred art of the way of the waffle.
Love it. Yeah.
So that touches on a couple of things that I think are really interesting. And so, because we talked a little bit about where we are, what type of universe we're living in.
So we have the three different ones. We have the mechanical, we have the natural world, and we have the cosmic lila, the game.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And are they also hierarchical?
I think they all exist at the same time.
Yeah.
But that's the really interesting thing, is where are you putting your attention? So if you're putting your attention purely on the physical nuts and bolts of the universe, and that's how you believe the universe works, that is how the universe will show up to you. If you put all your attention and focus on the natural laws and being in harmony or outside of harmony with them, that's the thing that's going to show up. If you start putting your attention on the relations and the game that you're playing, that will be the predominant thing that will show up.
Right.
But I think what we should add on, and perhaps is one higher level, because I think the thing with the divine Leela or game or play is it's very relational. So it's like a dance. In a dance, you're interacting with all of the other people who are also partaking in this dance.
Yeah.
And you've got to move with them, and you interact with them, and you have conversations. They tell you things, you tell them things. They learn from you, you learn from them. And so I think that's a wonderful way to start to develop your own, uncover your own character, and you start to find your own script.
Through the other people you interact with.
Through interacting with the world.
Yeah, and the world means humanity?
Yeah, it means humanity and all the troubles that brings into your life.
Yes.
But I think there's one higher level than that again. And that's, so if we talk about that as the relationship with the other characters here on Earth, there's also your relationship with the what shall we say, the divine creator, the highest consciousness,
God, the supreme,
all of these things. So just as you can have a relationship with all of the people around you, and you can have that relationship in a very harmonious state, how is your relationship with the divine creator, with the transcendent divine? And because you can have things quite well aligned with the people around you, but perhaps you're not giving any time or thought to your relationship with that source, that deeper source that is flowing through all of existence. And when you were talking before about how we would often see people in countries who their material situation is very poor, perhaps, but somehow they had a level of happiness and meaning that seemed to transcend often what people in the West are experiencing. Yeah. And one reason for that, I think, is they have their relationships between each other. They sometimes or often can be much deeper and more profound. So if you go to a country like India, the strength of the Indian relations is in their family. Yeah. The love of the Indian mother for her son is something that really can only be seen to be believed. Yes. And so there's this really powerful and beautiful relationships between each other, which gives life meaning and which gives life a very strong purpose. Yeah. And I think you see that through a lot of the Eastern world, that the relationship of the family is still very highly valued. Yes. Whereas in the Western world, we've become much more individualistic. And so we've lost those strong relations. And I always think it's funny, if you go back to the biblical stories, it's said that Noah was chosen to build the ark because his relations were perfect with the people around him. Yes. So somehow there's some
lifted him up above his peers.
Yeah,
somehow.
So there's something that ancient people saw about having your relationships with the people around you in the correct order and being closer to the divine in some way. And so if we look at those three levels, I would say the highest level is the spiritual game, like seeing the world as a spiritual game. And so if we see anything as a game, like a game always has to have a goal, and it needs to have some sort of, an aim that we were talking about.
It has some boundaries, some rules and regulations.
It does.
Laws.
But the idea with spirituality, I think, is to become completely in harmony and in alignment with the divine creative spirit of the universe. And it's not just for one moment or two moments or, once a day or twice a day. It's to learn to live in the world, but also at the same time be completely in harmony and completely in tune or alignment with the divine consciousness that pervades the universe. Yeah. Because when you're doing that, you're acting out the right script for you. You're doing the right actions at the right moment, in the right way. And so for me, that is really the highest form of the game. Yeah. And that's really the game that the spiritual masters are playing.
I was going to say, we had an example, both you and I, of somebody who played the game at that level, which is our spiritual teacher, Sri Chinmoy. And I was with him physically for 10 years, the last 10 years of his life. I think you were too. Yeah. And I think for me, he was somebody who played the game at that level. And it was amazing to see, right? It was amazing, the activities that he did. What would a person like that, what would his life look like?
Yeah. It was really amazing to see, because he was such an uninhibited human being. He was just completely naturally, spontaneously being who he was meant to be at every moment.
Yeah.
I never saw him suffering from shyness or anxiety or any of these sort of human experiences we're having, where we're trying to
insecurity,
find
jealousy, worry.
Exactly. He could go from one situation to the next. He could be at one moment telling jokes with his students and enjoying life, and the next moment on a stage in front of 10,000 people performing musical instruments, and the next moment meeting some sort of important world leader who is trying to inspire and offer some spiritual light to it. So it was wonderful to see that ability to change so quickly and spontaneously from one setting to the next. With and always keeping
but he was not like a chameleon, like catering to other people's needs. He stayed the same unique character in those interactions.
That was the wonderful thing. There was this thread that he was completely integrated with himself. There was
very authentic,
completely authentic. And it was a wonderful lesson. And I think so much of the lessons that you gain as someone who's following spiritual teachings is actually it's what the teacher writes and says is obviously tremendously important, but also how they carry themselves in the world, how they act on a day-to-day basis, how they interact with the people around them.
That is also their teaching, isn't
exactly.
it? It's not just what is written down in the books, although that is very important, but it's how they interact with the world, how they present themselves.
So I think that really is the zenith height of the game that is being played here. So from the billiard balls right up to the complete oneness with the divine creative force in the universe. So that's where we
are. Very good. We covered that.
And I think depending on how you focus your energy, what universe you believe you're living in, you will pay more attention to those different realms. And in your own life, it's not I'm saying that one of these is right and the other ones are wrong. It's almost like you need to find what resonates with you and what feels meaningful for you.
And they all have their own reality.
They do.
But again, if you don't choose consciously, then very often you go back to the default, right? Which is kind of what your culture that you've brought up in, has accepted as the reality.
And in some ways, the Western world has really accepted materialism. And so it's keeping us in this game of there is no meaning. There's nothing to look for. All there is consumerism.
I think it's kind of on its last legs, that kind of belief system.
Exactly. And I think if you actually really delve into most people don't actually believe in that.
No.
But it seems that that's the default belief
it is
system
the default. It's
that
funny.
will be given to you.
Well, it's also understandable if you go back to like centuries of very, very harsh Christianity, right? Which was a bit traumatic at times, where God is painted as this really, very strict, judgmental character, and you would go to hell if you didn't abide by all these, impossible rules and regulations. So, I think there's also a meaning and a function to moving away from God for a while, which is, I think, what the Western world did with the introduction of science and the reasoning mind. I think Sri Aurobindo commented on that when he said this was a necessary, let's say, part of the spiral upwards in our evolution. Like the evolution is never straight up. It goes in spirals. So sometimes we move away from the divine to kind of return to it in a different understanding. So not as this, judgmental being that is always, but now I think it's time for us to discover the divine within ourselves. So we don't need anybody else to tell us. We don't need the dogmas of the church. We can find the way, through our own processes. Of course, it's helpful to have a teacher or a guide or a mentor, and we can get help from spiritual books. But I think the essence is that the divine is inside of ourselves. It's not somewhere outside. It's not some belief system that we have to adhere to.
No, and I think you see people more and more are drawn to the types of traditions where they
Whoop! There goes our backdrop. Anyway, we'll carry on.
We'll carry on?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, no problem.
Funky.
So what I was going to say is that you see people are drawn now more than ever to spirituality or a belief system that recognizes that they have their own inherent wisdom and knowledge, that it's not trying to fill you up with facts and figures and things you have to believe. And that for me was one of the greatest things to come along to a meditation center. And really, the meditation centers of the world, they should be trying to teach you the practice of meditation. They should not be trying to convince you of one way of looking at the world or another. They should be allowing your own wisdom, your inner wisdom that you can uncover through your own practice. That's your own real treasure. And there's an aphorism that I really like from Sri Chinmoy, and it says, "Do not depend on others. You must chart your own course."
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, that's and it also goes back to the importance of practice.
Yes.
Because to chart your course, you do need some kind of spiritual discipline. You need some kind of practice.
Yeah, you don't just wander off randomly in some.
I mean, you
direction.
can do that, but it will be a bit hard. I think also one thing that I read in Sri Chinmoy's writings was like when you try to learn the lessons of life without the backing of a practice, it is like drinking the hot water of life from a cup. But if you practice the spiritual disciplines, it's like you have to taste the same water, but you have a little spoon. So it's like you can sip your way through. It becomes manageable.
Much more manageable. And so that idea for me that in any spiritual tradition, there's also the responsibility on you as the practitioner not to just blindly follow along with what others are doing. You need to find your own unique course within that general path, within that general flow of life. That there'll be some way, because the thing is as well, there's so many opportunities now, and this is almost one of the paralyzing things that we're dealing with in the modern world, is an infinite number of choices. Like, should I be doing this or this? Should I do this or this? And there's so many things that seem almost equally valuable to be spending our time on. So if we don't learn to become discerning as to what is in tune and in alignment with our own spiritual nature, we can very easily find ourselves following the course of someone else, following along in someone else's footsteps, and not realizing that that's perhaps the right path or the right way for them. But we have something that's unique for us, and perhaps we will miss out on that if we don't take the time to pay attention and be open to those.
Yeah, exactly. And how to find that which resonates with you. I think that's, again, comes back to having a practice. Because having a practice allows you to uncover that intuitive faculty. So what I've noticed with, for instance, a meditation practice, it really sharpens your intuition. And it really helps you to listen to your, what we call the inner voice. So, your soul, we talk about the soul, but it is an entity, I believe, that also has agency, but only it speaks a different language than the mind or the physical. It's a very subtle language. Some people call it light language, and it's so subtle that if you don't train yourself to hear it, you'll miss the messages.
And I think all of us who've practiced the spiritual path, to start with, you will often follow along in the footsteps of those who've walked before you.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
No, exactly. And so that gives you some guidance, and so you'll start practicing and you'll start moving forward, and then at some point you'll feel this very subtle wind or this little nudge inside your heart that's just sending you slightly over this way or slightly over that way. And it's learning to listen to those subtle guidance, that comes from within. And I know it took me many years to start listening to that myself, but I know that when I did, my life radically transformed. And I started to live a life that was uniquely and beautifully mine. And I started to find that just my day-to-day reality became much more meaningful and much more full and beautiful.
When you find your own groove. I think there's a spiritual idea that the helper eventually can become the bar. So it's something that helps you in the beginning, for instance, following in the footsteps of somebody else and going about the teachings as they are presented to you. Then that is a helper in the beginning because it sets you on your path. But then if you always, follow the same procedures and you always follow somebody else's guidance instead of your own soul's, then that becomes the bar. And you feel that, right? You become frustrated. It's like frustration is a clear sign, I think, that you're somehow perhaps not following the path that was chalked out for you.
And that's the great thing, that we do have all of this, let's say, inner technology is already built into the system.
I like that idea, inner technology.
We don't need to create it ourselves. It's actually already there, but we do need to learn to...
We don't need an AI to do that?
We do need to learn to still and calm our mind enough and become... sharpen our attention and our concentration so we can actually spend more time listening and less time speaking, so we can spend more time paying attention to the guidance that's coming up from within, rather than spending all of our time looking around and judging ourselves or comparing ourselves to others.
Yeah, I mean, we are social animals as humans. So it's very natural for us to look at what others are doing, and to copy. And I think there's there's time for that. And there's reason for that. But like you say, there's a time when you have to chalk out your own course. Yeah. So what was that for you? Because you just mentioned that there was a time when you felt that little wind, that little nudge.
And for me, I did try and resist it for as long as I could.
It's more comfortable, right?
I had some resistance to it. Yeah. And so what it was for me is, I remember in 2008, I was visiting New York for Sri Chinmoy's birthday. And there's this wonderful way that his students celebrate his birthday every year by doing an ultra marathon, which is 47 miles.
Yes,
approximately.
I've done it twice, and you've done it?
I've done it a few times.
I've done it 3 times, actually.
And so that starts at midnight on the beginning of his birthday. And so it basically runs through the night. And so it's on a loop course around this very interesting school building. And the reason why it's 47 miles is Sri Chinmoy did 2 ultra marathons in his life, and they were both 47 miles. And so he did it to celebrate his 47th birthday. Yeah. And so then it's just remained as a tradition.
It's almost twice a normal marathon.
It is, yeah. So it's a really challenging distance. It's a really challenging course. It's very hilly. Yeah. And I went down, I would normally go down most nights that was starting in the August birthday celebrations for Sri Chinmoy. And I watched the race. And at that point in my life, I was still considering myself as a short distance runner. I'd like to do up to the marathon, but mainly races shorter than that. Yeah. And so I went down and I saw this race, and I just got a tremendous thrill from watching it. I thought, wow, this is really something. I really felt just something inside me really awaken from watching it. Yeah. And so I stayed down for maybe an hour or so cheering the runners, and I went home and tried to put it aside, that sort of idea. I didn't want to dive into it immediately. And so then across the course of the next year, as we were moving towards the next birthday celebration, I kept on getting this feeling coming up that perhaps I should attempt the race the next year. And I kept on thinking, no, I haven't finished with the other races that I'm doing. I was still trying to improve my time for the marathon. And so I kept on pushing it back until it was maybe 3 months before the race. And at that point, it just it continually was coming up and knocking on my heart door and saying, hey, there is an experience here for you that could be really transformative. So at that point, I surrendered to that feeling, and I said, okay, I will do it.
You went purely by the feeling.
I went purely.
It's not an outer event that kind of.
No, it was just purely a feeling, like that there was something interesting there. There was something of the unknown. And so that year I lined up for the race, and immediately within 2 or 3 laps, I started to get this wonderful feeling, because the thing with most running events is the gun goes and the intensity is very high, and before you know it, the race is over. Yeah. And it's almost, especially in a shorter race, you never really have that much time to really settle into the experience. And you're constantly concentrating and pushing yourself to go as fast as you can. And the wonderful thing about these long races is that you've got a lot of time to settle into the race. You don't feel rushed. The experience, you have enough time. You're out there for 5 hours or 6 hours or 10 hours. Yeah. So you have a lot of time to really be conscious of the fact that you're out there and to pay attention to the sensations and the feelings. And I really just loved the whole experience of it. And that for me was an experience that opened so many doors and radically transformed the direction of my life.
So how did you do on that race, that first one?
I did quite well. And so I won the race, and I did a good time. Yeah. And so that gave me a lot of encouragement to try some more long races. And shortly after that, I went back to my own country, and I won a very famous trail race. And that really started me off in my career as an ultramarathon runner.
Yeah, so that was kind of the direction that your life is taking. You became an ultra runner.
Yeah, and that became, and it still is, something that's very important to me. But I perhaps would have put that off for many, many years if I hadn't listened to my heart to actually dive in. Yeah. And when I saw how much better my life became from following my heart's guidance, I started to trust it more and more.
So you could say it ties into the idea of acceptance of life, or the transformation of life.
Exactly. So it's like when you get a sensation or a feeling or inspiration, it's like actually accepting it and following it. Even if it's something that you're not 100% certain of, it's like try it. Like step into the unknown, challenge yourself. And as you do it more and more, you start to have more and more confidence in those feelings.
Yeah.
So to start with, you have been accustomed to following your mind's guidance through life.
Yeah.
And as many people would say, that the mind is a wonderful servant, but a very poor master.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, most of us use our mind as the master, and the heart, or the deeper part of our being that we should be listening to, becomes the servant.
Yeah.
And so we have everything the wrong way, the relationship the wrong way around. And so when you start to change that, and you start to, instead of following your mind and listening always to your mind, you start following your heart, you actually see your life becomes radically more interesting.
100%.
And you become much more successful in some ways. And successful, I don't mean just purely in the outer circumstances, but your actions line up more with who you truly are. And you start to act out the script, the character, the drama becomes much more meaningful and enjoyable.
And I think for that, a spiritual practice, again, is, to make that shift.
Yeah.
Because how do you go from the mind?
Yeah.
Sri Ramana often spoke about the mind desert
Yeah.
and the heart garden.
Yeah.
It's that this idea the heart is like a garden. It's very peaceful.
Yeah.
It's harmonious. It's joyful. It's
Yeah.
a great place to hang out.
It's full of wisdom. It's full of wisdom that is not yet being revealed to you.
Yeah.
So the more time you can spend with your consciousness connected to the heart, the more opportunity you're having for this wisdom to come to the fore and to make itself known to you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's spending time with your heart, like nourishing it. In the beginning, it's more like a tender plant. It's like a little shoot that comes off the ground.
Yeah.
But if you spend some time every day being with your heart, connecting with your heart through meditation or through chanting or singing, but really focused on the spiritual heart, then that little plant grows into a tree and eventually becomes like a huge, powerful tree that has flowers and fruits and can give shade and can really guide us in our life. So I also feel that the heart is a fantastic, it's the best possible tool that we have for guidance.
Yeah, and the thing with the heart is as well, in my mind, I do tend to find that it feels more limited. Like there's only so much I can think. There's only so much at this time I can imagine. So at the beginning we were talking about the power of imagination, and some people are blessed with incredible imaginations. Yeah. But most of us feel that if we lived only in our mind, if we do live in our mind all the time, that reality becomes in some way boxed in or limited by the experiences we've had and the conditioning we've had. And I tend to find that the more I spend time in my heart, the heart feels boundless. Yeah. So us as human beings, we're finite, but it seems as though our heart is infinite.
Yeah.
I've never felt as though I've got near the edge of my heart.
Right.
It's not like, oh, that's it. That's the boundary of my heart.
Yeah.
And so when I go into my heart and I feel this sense of expansion, I feel this sense of connection, I've never got to the sense where like, that's it. There's nothing more. It seems like the further I go, the further I expand myself through the heart, it seems boundless.
It's boundless, yeah, exactly.
And that's a wonderful thing, because very often we can really suffer because we can feel so small and insignificant. Like if we look out into the universe and we see this incredible vastness and we see, who am I? Just a small drop.
Speck of dust.
But when we start to enter into our heart and expand, it's like the idea of the drop of water. When the drop of water hangs on to its limited existence, it can feel very helpless and it can feel terrified. And so as it falls as a drop of rain and comes down the river into the ocean, if it flows into the ocean and it's still trying to hang on to its sense of separativity, it's always going to be terrified that, oh my God, I could be destroyed or lost by this giant ocean.
Yeah.
But as soon as it's willing to let go of that limited sense of self, it doesn't lose anything. But what happens is it becomes the ocean.
Yeah.
Which that is a tremendously different thing. Rather than being swallowed up and lost, it's instead, no, I've expanded and I've identified myself and I have become the ocean.
So next time when you look up to the stars, you can feel that's what I am. I am the universe. It's all inside of me.
Yeah. So
there's no separation.
So that's a really good segue into what am I?
Okay. Yes.
We talked about where we are.
Yeah.
And then what are we?
So what is different from who?
So, I like this. What is different from who? So when we talk about who am I, there's a strong correlation with what I am.
Okay.
But I think there's some interesting ideas to explore when we talk about what am I?
Yeah.
Because again, there's the same different types of levels. So when we say, what am I could say, well, all I am is some billiard balls sort of, all joined together, these molecules, and they're operating, as an organism at this point, but at some point they're all going to fall to pieces.
Yeah.
And so that's one way of looking at the physical reality. And for me, that's not an overly inspiring picture to have of myself and the type of experiences I'm having. And so instead, there's another way. There's another way of looking at that. And the way I like to look at that is, so let's say the universe began with the Big Bang. And so there was this huge expansion of energy. And so in physics, they say that energy can never be destroyed.
Yeah.
It simply can change forms.
Yeah. Is that the second law or the first law?
It's one of those.
One of the laws.
But so there's this energy has been thrown out into creation. And so my question is, when does the Big Bang end?
It's still going?
Is it?
It's still going?
It's still
Are you telling me it's still
going.
going?
It is still
Holy cow.
going. Because I see a lot of people really struggle with that sense of, what am I? Who am I to have some grand visions or grand dreams or powerful experiences?
Yeah.
I'm just this small finite being. But my answer to that is no, you are not some small finite being. You are actually the ripple of energy of the Big Bang manifesting itself in every single moment as we move forward.
Because you are the Big Bang.
You are the Big Bang.
Oh, man.
And so to end up where you are as a biological, as this physical form even, you've had to have 3.5 billion years of successful transformation of that energy from one generation to the next.
Yeah.
So in an unbroken chain for 3.5 billion years, your ancestors have been passing that energy of the Big Bang, that ripple of energy that is constantly moving forward through time, in the now, and that has ended up in this moment. You are the one who has that responsibility of carrying.
You're the culmination of the Big Bang at
so
this point.
You are the culmination of 14 billion years of creation has ended up with you sitting here, a vibrating being of energy.
Oh, man.
And so when I think about it like that, I'm like, wow, yeah, I'm not some insignificant thing. I actually have some amazing opportunity to do something, to be conscious, to move forward.
So isn't that, I'm now going to play a little the devil's advocate. Isn't that a very dangerous idea? Because then you can get delusions of grandeur. Where's the role of humility there?
So, humility, that is a very powerful quality, humility.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that we should definitely talk about.
Okay.
But what I would say is very often I see people suffering more from a lack of confidence and a lack of belief in their own capacities, rather than...
There are some individuals that have delusions of grandeur, but they're few and far between.
Exactly. I'd say most of us have been almost convinced of our own smallness.
Yeah.
And then I think on some level, if you can even use that physical reality of what you actually are as something that's incredibly interesting and inspiring.
Yeah.
Because, some people walk around and feel like, God, life is so dull. Life is just so boring. Yeah. And it's like, oh my God, do you forget what you are? You are the Big Bang itself, manifesting itself at every moment. It's like, that is something.
Yeah.
That is something tremendously interesting.
That's a fantastic idea, but how can you feel that? How can you derive inspiration from that? If you feel that your life is indeed dull.
Yeah. So I would say it's all about the stories you're telling to yourself. So if the stories you're telling yourself is that I'm weak and hopeless and small and insignificant, those are the types of experiences you're going to create in your life. And that would be the next level, let's say. So if we say in the first level, you're the Big Bang itself, you're the energy of the Big Bang rippling forth into the universe. The next level up, if we look back to the ancient stories and the ancient writings, is this idea that comes from the book of Genesis. And I also just want to remind people that the Bible for the longest time was the book. It was the only story going. It was
in the Western world.
In the Western world, it was the book that was. Yeah. I think it actually means the book.
Yeah, it does.
So it was the book, but the old stories in the Bible are far, far older than the more recent biblical stories.
Yeah.
And so, in the book of Genesis, it tells stories that come from ancient peoples. It comes from people who would have been telling these stories for thousands of years.
There was an oral tradition.
An oral tradition, and most important message for me is this idea that we are made in the image of God. And God for me is, and perhaps for these people as well, was the divine creator, the creator of the universe. So we have been made in the image of the creator. And what that means to me is that we also are creators. We're co-creators of the universe. And so it's up to each of us through our actions, the thoughts that we have, the words that we say, the actions that we take, that we're actually at each moment creating the universe around us.
We are doing that no matter what we do or think. So even if we have a very negative approach to life and have very negative thoughts, we are also creating.
Exactly. So we actually have a choice then and a responsibility, I think, to take on that if we're unhappy with the universe in any way, we've been given the power to transform the universe. And so if we want the world to become more loving, more beautiful, more caring, more concerned, any of those things, it's actually all of us have a role to play.
Yeah,
we're each creating it.
Nobody is insignificant.
No one is insignificant.
Yeah, that's a really powerful idea, which is so untrue. I feel.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of the big lies that we are fed, that we are insignificant, we are meaningless. We it was I think Marianne Williamson who gave words to the idea that we are more afraid of our greatness than of our light, than of our darkness.
Yeah.
In a sense, the darkness is a little bit safe. It's comforting. It's a little, we are safe in our own kind of small world. But in fact, we have this innate greatness about us. We are made in the image of God. We are divine in essence. But somehow that frightens us.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think perhaps the responsibility that we would have to take if we truly chose to believe that.
Right.
If we truly believe that, how would we have to act on a daily basis? Oh, yeah,
exactly.
And that would stop us from dwelling in comfort and lethargy. Yeah. And if we really truly believed that, how would we live our lives?
Well, it's always easier to go downhill than uphill.
Yeah.
Right? It's always easier to destroy a sandcastle than to build one.
Yes.
So that's the idea that to dwell on the negative is kind of going downhill. It's the way of least resistance.
And I think many of us are afraid of that responsibility that it would entail. And the thing is, we've for the longest time now in our culture, we've celebrated all of our rights, but without taking on any of the responsibilities that should come with those. And so this idea...
So when you speak about rights, what do you mean?
Like, we have the right to freedom of this and freedom of that, and I can say what I want and no one can force me to do anything. And all of these ideas that I have these inalienable rights. Yes. But we never want to look at the other side of that, where perhaps we have some responsibility to this world and to this universe to make it as... to lift it up, to transform it and move it in a positive direction.
And it doesn't mean we have to become world leaders. It doesn't mean we have to become geniuses in creativity.
No.
We can be a bus driver. We can be, a waffle maker.
Yes, exactly.
We can be a musical instrument seller and change the world, can't we not?
Yeah, very, very much so, because we change the world or transform the world by the vibration and the energy we offer to the world. So when we're standing in the world, whatever we're doing, if we're doing it from a place of love and self-giving, that is radically transforming the world. And there's those great studies they've done where they've shown that if you could just have this many people at one moment together practicing meditation and offering loving kindness to the world, that you could bring about world peace. And I know there's some studies where they've shown by having a certain number of people meditating in a particular city, the crime rate fell, all of these positive things occurred.
Yeah, I know that a particular experiment was done in the early 90s in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So it was done by this group of people, the Transcendental Meditation people, who invited, I think, 2,000 of their meditators. And they set it up in a way that they would meditate for a few hours together each day. Yeah. And they would look at the crime rate. And they went to the chief of police with their hypothesis. We said, we will bring some people together and meditate for 2 weeks. And we think the crime rate will decrease by about 20%. Yeah. Of course, the chief of police laughed at them. So only 20 inches of snow can do that. But the experiment was in the middle of the summer, so he had very little faith. But they did the experiment, and they flew in all these people from different parts of the world. And I think they started with a few hundred, and it became a few thousand. Yeah. And lo and behold, they looked at the crime rates, 23% less crime.
Wow.
Over this 2-week period. And then when they stopped the experiment, very gradually the crime rate went back to the normal baseline level.
Yeah.
And so that's the only, explanation for that is that
Yeah.
somehow this experiment was successful.
Yeah.
So there is something about meditation, especially if
Yeah.
you meditate in a big group,
Yeah.
that has a radical effect, positive effect on the
Yeah.
world around you. And
Yeah.
I totally believe that.
I totally do as well. And it's really nice to see over time science is moving further away from that purely mechanical model that we talked about. And as you start to get to the forefronts of understanding of the universe, we're again finding that the universe is far stranger than we could ever imagine. So
Yeah.
things like quantum entanglement, which is the idea that two electrons can be entangled in such a way that even if you had them at the far ends of the universe, by interacting with one of them, the other electron, a pair of electrons at the far end of the universe, would change its spin.
I think Einstein called it spooky action at a distance.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that concept, spooky action at a distance. And so perhaps everything is interconnected in a way that's far more fundamental than science has been able to see at this point, because everything is all about how refined and subtle your observations are.
Yeah.
And so it's not until you can make a device or find a technology that becomes subtle enough to understand these connections between everything, which I don't think we're close to that yet.
Yeah, well,
you
there may not be a scientific instrument, but we do have an instrument, which is our heart and our soul, to kind of differentiate and kind of feel and understand these subtler layers of existence and reality and consciousness.
Yeah.
But there's this very great mystery in the quantum physics, is the switch from the quantum level to the traditional classical physics level, right? So when it's very small, it behaves in very strange ways and unpredictable ways. But then when it gets us to a certain height and length and breadth, when objects become bigger, all of a sudden they seem to obey a whole different set of laws, like the Newtonian laws.
So I think that's something they're still grappling with.
Yes.
So we'll see, we'll follow that with interest.
We'll follow them closely, and exactly.
So one of the other ideas I think that ties in with that is the idea of morphic fields of resonance.
Morphic resonance.
Yeah,
Rupert Sheldrake.
Which is another really great idea, I think, which captures that idea that is any species, we're all intimately connected with each other.
Yeah.
And so that for me is a really beautiful thing. And it doesn't matter if we can perhaps understand it in a concrete fashion. Does it work? And I think that's one of the...
But explain it. What is morphic resonance? What are morphic fields?
So there's an idea that the information for any being or any species of beings is encoded and exists in a field of energy around them. So all trees have this field of morphic resonance.
Is it a field of consciousness?
Yeah, it's a field of consciousness or energy or information, you could say.
Information.
And so, because the question was, how do these basic building blocks in a plant or a tree, let's say, how do some of them know to become bark, and some become like the heartwood of the tree, and some become flowers, and some become fruits, and it's like there's a huge amount of information that we can't quite understand where it's existing. And if you look on the human realm, a good example that I like with this is when human beings have a breakthrough in any field of endeavor, it's much easier for the people that come after to achieve that task than the people who did it for the first time. So a really good example was with Roger Bannister running the sub 4 minute mile.
Yes.
So for such a long time, human beings were really stuck at this point just outside 4 minutes. And so people were getting close, but no one was really taking that step.
So running 4 minutes for 1 English mile.
Yeah, 1 mile. So just over
4
1600.
laps of the track.
Yeah. And so, but as soon as Roger Bannister did it, in the next few years, suddenly everyone was doing it. So guys that were stuck for many years just outside it, suddenly they all burst through.
I think after he did it, it was like 2 or 3 weeks when the next person did it.
Yeah.
It was in 1956, right, when he did that. So, yeah, exactly.
So there's something beautiful about that. And I think that happens in all sorts of fields.
It happens in the animal world. There's this famous experiment where I think there were sparrows. And they found in England, they found a way to open the milk bottles of the milkmen.
Did they?
By like taking off the lid.
Yeah.
And then once this colony of sparrows discovered that, all over the country, all of a sudden, sparrows were like opening lids of milk canisters. They had to change the milk bottles in order to protect them.
Yes.
So all of a sudden, it spread, from this one sparrow colony to all these different sparrow colonies. Yeah,
and so that's the idea. So the idea is like, for example, say horse. As soon as a horse is born, the horse understands has already all of this knowledge about how to be a horse. It doesn't need to be taught how to be a horse from the get-go. It already has all of that information available to it from all of the horses that have come before it.
Right.
And so, like with the idea with the sparrows, once one sparrow understands something, it enters into that field of resonance for all of that species, and that spreads like wildfire.
So if one of the human species gets
something.
enlightened, for instance, or has a spiritual breakthrough, we do it for the whole of humanity.
Exactly. And I think you see that. I think like even across my own lifetime, I have seen the change in consciousness and how consciousness is moving in a very positive direction.
Yeah.
So if you look at the people's openness and people's interest in spiritual topics and interest in the practice of yoga and all of these things, which I think are very important and useful for human flourishing, over the last 20, 30 years, they've become absolutely prevalent everywhere in the world.
Like, it's completely become mainstream. I remember when I was 20 years ago giving meditation classes, it was really almost looked down on. It was something vague and something, building castles in the air and something, people didn't really understand. And now it's mainstream. Everybody meditates.
Yeah. I mean, you can go to almost any city in the world and find a yoga class going on. It's like these things have become such a common part of human experience now. Yeah. And people are much more open about them than they were 20 years ago. Like when people know that I meditate and I discuss it with them, people just say, just off the cuff, like, oh yeah, I really need to do that. I know. So there's this kind of understanding in the culture and the human consciousness that this is something that is going to help solve some of the problems.
So does that also work the other way? Let's say the negative way. If something negative happens or somebody does something wrong or bad, does that also affect the species?
I mean, I think there would be an effect. I would always try and hold the position that light is more powerful than darkness. Because that's the thing. All you need is one light bulb to light a dark room.
On the other hand, you need one drop of poison to ruin a glass of milk.
Yeah. So, I mean, I will always take the side of light. So that's my feeling. And I don't have a strong set of arguments to back that up, but it's just intuitively what I feel is that if you have one person with one really good, beautiful, illuminating idea, that can illumine hundreds of people.
Yes, I'm on that page too.
So it's one of those things that perhaps this is a moment where we need faith. To have faith in that idea.
So what are we then? If you talk about the question, what are we?
So the final level I would like to just mention is there's this great idea that are we a human being having spiritual experiences, or are we actually a spiritual being here having a human experience?
That's a famous quote. I think it's by Gurdjieff.
Yeah, and it is a really interesting thing because what we identify with in some way we become. So if we are always identifying ourselves with the human aspect of us, with our body, and
finite experience,
the limited nature of ourselves, that's the type of experiences then will attract things that will reinforce that to us. Whereas if I flip that around and I say, no, I'm a spiritual being, I'm a being of light and consciousness, and I'm here in this form to have a human experience, to learn some lessons, it will help me keep my perspective coming from the right place. It will help me see things more clearly. And instead of always being just caught up in the drama of the game, it will allow me to experience it more lightly, to have a lighter touch here. Yes. And I think that is something very useful.
Beautiful. Yeah. I think we'll have to wrap it up with that thought.
Yeah.
Just to close up, we have a horse here. What is the meaning of the horse?
Well, my name, one of the meanings of my name is horse. So in Sanskrit, they've got 4 words for horse.
Yes.
And so Vajin means swift, strong, spirited, and heroic. So it is that type of horse. It is a swift, strong, spirited, and heroic horse.
Lovely.
And in the inner worlds, there's one of the higher worlds is called the Gandharva Loka, the world of the Gandharvas.
Of your music shop.
Exactly. And so it can mean, you can translate it to mean the world of celestial musicians. And in that world, they ride around on a horse, a flying horse. And the type of horse they fly around on is the Vajin horse. And so it was really interesting when I was given that spiritual name, because those qualities really reflect my soul's qualities.
Yeah.
But also the idea that it's the type of horse that the Gandharvas fly around on. And I work and manage a Gandharva Loka music store. I thought there was many nice synchronicities.
It's very apt. Well, my name means newness, ever
Yes.
new. So for next podcast, we have to find something that represents
Something new.
newness. Okay.
Wonderful.
So great. We'll wrap it up with that thought. And this was our second episode. If you like this podcast, you can subscribe. And we're on all the different podcast channels. Thank you so much for being here with us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.